The insurrection of 1798 was one of the outstanding events in the history of Ireland, bringing together the religious traditions of Ireland in the common cause of civil and religious freedom. Inspired by the ideals of liberty, equality and fraternity, the Society of United Irishmen had been founded a few years earlier in Belfast by Wolfe Tone and others, bringing together Catholic, Protestant and Dissenter in a common search for a just society. Beginning in May 1798, a series of uncoordinated risings against the British Crown took place in Wexford, Carlow, Kildare, Dublin, Belfast and Down. Laois, or Queen's County as it was then known, experienced a number of incidents, and this video takes a tour of the places across the county where monuments have been erected to commemorate the tragic but heroic events of 1798. Our first stop is Rathdowney, where this plaque was unveiled in May 1998 to mark the bicentenary of the 1798 rebellion. This spot in the square in Rathdowney marks the Croppy's grave. Croppy was a nickname for the United Irishmen rebels who wore their hair cut short, a style inspired by the French Revolution to defy the long wigs worn by the British establishment. The inscription here in Rathdowney reads, "This plaque marks the grave site of Jerome Watson, a native of Crosspatrick in the parish of Johnstown." Local tradition refers to this as the Croppy's grave. Watson was tried in Rathdowney for a firearms raid at the house of Mr. Vickers of Lee Valley on the 17th of March 1798, during which the steward Mr. Whittaker was shot dead while resisting the raiders. Following his conviction, Watson was flogged and hanged from a tree at this spot. His body was then cut down and buried here. Around this time, a Tree of Liberty was planted within half a mile of Rathdowney, and the Maryborough Assizes recorded that 2 men administered the oath of the United Irishmen to a man at Donaghmore. This memorial was erected in 1998 in memory of all those who died or suffered during the turbulent era of the United Irishmen's Rebellion, 1798. Our next stop is Ballynakill, where in 1899, to mark the centenary of the 1798 rebellion, this Celtic cross was erected by the Ballynakill 98 Club, carved in white limestone at that time by Mr. James Walsh of Carlow. Newspaper reports from 1898 and 1899 give a great insight into the events of that time and the work of the local committee, which, interestingly, laid the monument's foundation stone on Christmas Day 1898 to the memory of 2 men, Comerford and Crennan, who met violent deaths on the square in Ballynakill in 1798. By the time the monument was formally unveiled in a ceremony on the 15th of August 1899, 6 names were inscribed on it. In addition to Comerford and Crennan, the names Geoghegan, McAvoy, Fagan and Fox appeared on it, but little is known locally about these 4 men or their involvement in the 1798 rebellion. As regards Comerford and Crennan, we rely on the speech of the parish priest Reverend J. Connolly, who chaired proceedings for the ceremony of laying the foundation stone on Christmas Day 1898, and his words, "You are aware of our business here today. It is to raise a monument, simple but solid, to perpetuate the memory of 2 men who died for Ireland in 1798. Not indeed that they had the opportunity of dying in the open battlefield in a fair fight? No, they were slaughtered at their own doors because they were suspected of loving their country. 2 of the men were slaughtered in 98 in cold blood on the very spot where you stand, and on that very spot you and I have come together today to lay the foundation stone of a monument that will show to future generations that we are not ungrateful or unmindful of the men who died for us and our cause in 1798. This inscription on the front base reads, "This cross is erected by the Ballinkill 98 Club to commemorate the memory of the men who gave their lives for Ireland in 1798. Comerford, Crennan, Gagan, McAvoy, Fagan, Fox." A further inscription on the monument in the square of Ballinkill informs us that the Patriots were interred at nearby Castle Lane, where a model of the monument was unveiled in 1998 as part of the bicentenary celebrations. The inscription on the monument in Castle Lane reads, "This cross was erected in May 1998 by the Ballinkill 98 Committee to commemorate the bicentenary of the 6 men whose memory is perpetuated on the 98 memorial on the square. The 6 Patriots, Comerford, Crennan, Gagan, McAvoy, Fagan and Fox, are interred here. R.I.P. We are in Mountmellick, where this fine monument was erected to mark the centenary of 1798 in the appropriately named Wolfetone Street. Here, 11 United Irishmen, arrested on suspicion by the yeomanry, were tried by martial law, condemned and hanged from the shafts of a horse's cart on the 11th and 13th of June 1798. The inscription reads, 11 brave United Irishmen, whose names are hereon inscribed, were hanged near this spot on the 11th and 13th of June 1798. Patrick Dunn, William Holohan, Francis Dunn, Willie Broch, Daniel Dunn, James Deegan, Thomas Dunn, Patrick Murphy, John Guilfoyle, Daniel Conroy and George Gilligan. To their memory, this cross was erected a century later by their successors, still struggling to attain the objects for which they died, as a small tribute to their unflinching patriotism, unswerving devotion to the cause of liberty, and the unshrinking bravery they exhibited when in the power of their oppressors. 2 of the 11 executed in Mountmellick were buried here in Graig Cemetery, outside the town on the Killy Road. The other 9 were interred here at the historic Ivy Chapel graveyard, about 1.5 miles from Mountmellick, in a southeast direction, in a laneway off the Ridge Road that leads to Portlaoise. Next on our tour, we head to the Slieve Bloom Mountains, and specifically Ballinahemy Mountain, a few miles beyond Clonaslee, near the Offaly border. It is believed that several men from the Laois-Offaly border area who had fought at the Battle of Vinegar Hill on the 21st of June 1798 fled to this area to hide in the mountains, as their homes were attacked and burned to the ground. They were, however, found by the yeomen and killed here in the mountain, and this monument stands in their memory. 2 of those hiding, John Daly and James Scully, from nearby Cadamstown in County Offaly, escaped, but they were subsequently captured by the yeomen. Daly was flogged in Kinnity and died soon afterwards, while Scully was shot dead at his own doorway. Our next stop is Portarlington, where in 1979 this impressive Celtic cross was erected in the square a few metres from the market house. The monument is dedicated to the glorious memory of Darby Highland Kilmullen, John Costello Lee, Robert Foster Lee, Michael Dempsey Trieskin, United Irishmen executed in this square 12th of May 1798. Also Peter and John Bannon Lee executed in Dublin. Ersan Kirt is Tira. The men executed here were captured in the roundup of rebels in May 1798 following the Battle of Monasterevin. In Canon O'Hanlon's History of the Queen's County, he wrote that a party variously estimated at 1,000 or 2,000 attacked Monasterevin, which was garrisoned by 84 yeomen. The fight was bravely maintained for a couple of hours, and the issue in doubt, until the yeomen made a charge and drove off the assailants, who set fire to some houses and retired under the shelter of the smoke, leaving 60 or 70 of their number on the field. Some of the survivors proceeded towards Portarlington, intending to capture the town, but they were met and easily dispersed by a small body of cavalry at Clonana, about 4 miles distance from Portarlington, where about 20 of them were slain. Other accounts locally record that Highland, Costello, Foster and Dempsey were tortured after being placed on a rack. They were then ordered to walk along a plank out of one of the windows on the first floor of the market house on the Spa Street side with a rope around their necks. When each man dropped, the rope strangled them in front of a sizable and emotional crowd. Waiting on the ground was a butcher with a knife to disembowel each man. It appeared briefly that Dempsey would be spared when a reprieve reputedly from the Earl of Portarlington arrived and stopped the execution. However, one account claims that Dempsey was then hurled down into the square and that he died there in front of his wife. The remains of the victims were buried in the square on the Spa Street side of the market house, but sometime later they were removed by relatives under the cover of darkness and interred at Killinard. Our next stop on this tour is Wolf Hill Graveyard, where in June 1998 this memorial was erected by the Wolf Hill 98 Committee and unveiled at a commemoration ceremony attended by descendants of men who fought in 1798. The inscription reads, "This memorial has been erected in honour of those Wexford men who gave their lives for Irish freedom, having died in this area during the 1798 rebellion. Yesh de go raibh a Hanabaka, Dílis, de cum glóra de agus honora na hÉireann." Those who died in this area in 1798 are believed to have suffered their injuries at the Battle of Castlecomer on the 24th of June, when thousands of retreating Wexford insurgents marched on Castlecomer following their defeat at Vinegar Hill in Wexford. However, the arrival from Kilkenny City of over 1,000 British Army troops and artillery forced the insurgents to abandon their assault on Castlecomer, and a substantial number retreated towards Wolf Hill, where many of them died in the laneways and fields of Slatlower and Wolf Hill. A memorial stone erected at nearby Slatlower marks the campfield where the Wexford insurgents, under the command of Father John Murphy, camped on the night following the Battle of Castlecomer. The next day, the insurgents proceeded back along the ridge of Leinster towards Gore's Bridge, leaving their fatally wounded comrades to be buried in Wolf Hill. Our final stop on this tour is at Greycullen on the Laois-Carlow border, where What is known as the Croppy's Grave marks the burial ground of 640 victims of the Battle of Carlow that took place on the 25th of May 1798. To mark the first centenary of the 1798 rebellion, this high cross, carved in Carlow limestone by sculptor James Walsh, was unveiled on the 24th of July 1898. The same sculptor that carved the Ballynakill monument that I spoke about earlier. The Battle of Carlow was one of the bloodiest events of the 1798 rebellion. Early in the morning of the 25th of May 1798, 4 parties of the United Irishmen, including a band of several hundred insurgents from Ballymoiler in Laois, then known as Queen's County, converged on Carlow town to support the broader rebellion. But they marched directly into a forewarned British military ambush with devastating results. Soldiers hiding in surrounding houses opened fire, and they began setting fire to adjoining cabins and houses to smoke out rebels who had run for cover. Altogether, around 150 homes were burned, and everyone inside them, men, women and children, died in those fires. Those who tried to escape the flames were shot instantly. In all, 640 people were killed on the streets and homes of Carlow on that fateful day, and they were interred here in Greycullen in what was a large sandpit. In the days after the battle, up to 200 arrests were made of suspected insurgents, many of whom were subsequently executed. Ireland of 1798 was a very different place. For the most part, Irish people at that time could not own land, they could not own property, they could not enter Parliament, they could not educate their children, they could not ordain the clergy of their own church. Power was in the hands of the ascendancy class, which was dominated by a small number of large landowners. In effect, the 1798 insurrection was a battle between those who had power and property and those who had no rights or privileges at all. For the United Irishmen, the 1798 rebellion was a failure, as their forces were conquered and brutal reprisals were meted out to the rebels, as happened at the sites we've toured today in County Laois and elsewhere in Ireland. The 1843 poem, The Memory of the Dead, penned by John Kells Ingram, made famous the line, "Who fears to speak of 98?" and it became a cornerstone of Irish nationalist identity, particularly in the 19th century. Until the next time, goodbye for now.